Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Human School's Curation Corner, just one part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Randy.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Chad.
And you know the drill. Each episode, we engage in a brief conversation focused on a specific resource. First, we summarize the author's ideas. Then we make connections to our own experiences. And then we wrap up the episode, finally sharing insights and some additional questions that can further our own learning and hopefully yours. In today's episode, we're chatting about the article, As a Parent and Educator, I Say We Need a System Driven by Purpose, Not Test Scores, authored by Eunice Mitchell. If you're interested in the actual article, you can find a link below in the video at thehuman.school. So here's what the author's saying. So we know that the standardized system is actually kind of damaging to kids and society, but yet, in her words, I feel like I'm in a blockbuster film, The Matrix, plugged into a system that's a farce, yet knowing a better reality. So she starts off by telling the story of her son taking the PSAT and how society's created this narrative that one score is such a significant factor in their future. And I love this quote. We have tied ourselves to old ways and doing things while preaching deep desires for innovation. So I think it's really challenging not to play the game. And this article really delivers that. And it's really hard to not play the game and to get sucked back into that old narrative. So to help break herself out of this narrative, the author recalls her beliefs and values, which are aligned with her employer, who is the Big Picture Learning Schools, where she does work. This reminds me of a couple of things. First, the pull that this current system and its structures has on us to keep us in line. And second, an antidote that pull is, once again, stories of a new narrative where purpose is the driver and not the test scores. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I feel for her as she's talking. You know, like I've said before, I taught high school for a number of years, and it's hard not to feel all of the pressure of the system. You know, we teach in Pennsylvania, and I taught high school English, and so the Keystone test scores and making sure that you meet it, and the benchmark assessments, and not feeling like a total failure when things don't look good numerically, and trying to, like she said, trying to bring herself back to her values and her beliefs. And it made me think about Todd Rose's two books, The Dark Horse and End of Average. The End of Average was a huge shift for me in understanding how much we make decisions based on this notion of average that doesn't actually work for anybody. And so for her, same thing. We've decided that we need to standardize what success looks like. We need to nationalize that with something like the SATs and the PSATs so that there's some sort of a norm that everybody has to meet to show that they're successful. And then when your child doesn't, or the school doesn't, it feels pressure. It feels like pressure. But then remembering that the entirety of what it's based on is nonsense, that doesn't work for anybody, no matter where you go and who you talk to. And then for Dark Horse, that the goal should be, what is the fit? What are the pieces that make you who you are, that you can chase and you can create learning through, and not the average. So that's what had me thinking. Chad, what about you?
So I have an 8-year-old who gets a report card now. And we laughed because they kept sending us emails about like checking the report card. And I think we had gone about 3 weeks before we finally logged into the parent portal to look at it. And it was a reminder to me of how much, you know, that part of the system, like there's almost an odd feeling I have, like I don't care, which I know I'm supposed to care about the report card. And I know I'm supposed to value that. But we kind of just were like, okay, like, and in a weird way, I hope that doesn't change, although I suspect that as our boys get older, we're going to be paying more attention to it. So I felt her. I also, you guys know I spend probably way too much time on TikTok. And the other night I came across one where a young lady was sharing all of her accomplishments, her GPA, her standardized test scores, all these volunteer hours. And then she showed the colleges that she applied to and was denied, at one after another. And it just reminded me of the game again, as this parent, an educator talked about, is this game that we're all playing. And it is disheartening. And I felt for this young lady who, kind of went through the list of these dream schools and despite some really impeccable accomplishments and volunteerism and work and great grades and things like that. And you still wonder, is the system rigged? And she uses this great, I always screw this up and Rachel can help me, this metaphor and analogy of like this octopus, right? And a thing that I connected to with the way that these tentacles of standardized testing, they really do wrap around so much of what we do. The one thing that I wanted to kind of object to, and not that I think that she's wrong, but I wanted a question, so objector in our language here, was, do we all feel the negativity of standardized tests? Because one of the things that I wonder about is, like, I think that when standardized test scores are good, a lot of people use that as their identity. But when they're bad, they want to deny them. And I think that we have a system in which I would prefer that we just completely disregard them altogether because they are dehumanizing. But I think that this idea that like all educators see standardized tests as evil, that may be true. But I do sense that when things are good, people want to claim those as a sense of accomplishment, as opposed to reject them wholeheartedly. So to me, to reject them as a measurement tool should be about rejecting them outright, not just when things are good or when things are bad.
Is that because we can chalk it up as a win because that's what the system tells us is important? And so when we're all proficient or distinguished, then we can sort of chalk that up as a win because it's in our favor and it feels good.
Yeah, and I guess to me this kind of leads to my wondering or my question, which is, and I'm going to accuse the entire system and acknowledge that I'm a part of that. We have not changed the narrative, nor have we found a better way in most places to represent what success looks like for our kids and for ourselves. And so my frustration with the system, the part that I've got to own, is we've not designed a better way of doing it. And I think it starts locally, where each, the work that a lot of districts will do around profile of a graduate or profile of a learner will say, this is what we believe the end outcome should look like for our kids. And so what I will say is, my wondering is, how do we design better systems that help tell the story of the things that we value? We can't both be frustrated with standardized tests and then ignore that we are culpable within that by not designing a better system.
Yeah, that actually resonates, I think, with some of the work that we did where I was when I retired, and I think it's changed somewhat, but basically sending the message to the board that standardized tests are one mark of what we're doing. But here are a whole bunch of other things that we're doing. And then you said, like, we did the profile of the graduate. We would have, at curriculum meetings, we would have kids come in every month and they would share the things that they were doing so that the board, the people who are making those policy decisions, were seeing that there is much more going on here than just the standardized test scores. And our scores weren't bad. They weren't great. They weren't the best in the county, but we didn't really care. It wasn't really what we wanted to focus on, but we did realize that it was one indicator. And here in Pennsylvania, it's part of the evaluation system. So, it wasn't something we could totally push off the radar, but shaping the narrative. And I think this is actually one of the main roles of leadership, is shaping the narrative and the story that, okay, we're not putting all of our eggs in the standardized test score basket. There's a lot more to this. I think what's interesting about the article is I've always felt like educators feel trapped in a system they don't know what to do about. And I think what was humanizing about this article was, here's this woman who's working at the top leadership level in this really well-known learner-centered network, and she can't get away from the old system, even though she probably goes into her cocoon, which is not perfect, I'm sure, because big picture learning schools are in public schools, so they have to do standardized tests as well, depending on the system that they're in. But I thought it was interesting. It really made it sort of, I bet this article will resonate with people because of that. Here is somebody who's articulating how I feel. And I think my insight from that is that she helps us understand that when we feel hopeless, that we can connect with others who are doing the work, and most importantly, their stories, because that's what humanizes that dehumanizing feeling of being trapped.
Yeah, and I appreciate the sentiment from both of you. I think that her experience speaks to kind of what Chad was saying, is that we all still get stuck. Even when I do think that if you ask educators just as a general question, what do we think of standardized tests? Everybody says that they're nonsense. I don't think that there's anybody who thinks otherwise. And maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, maybe the people who make them. But I think when we do well, it taps into the part of us that still feel the tentacles, to use her that we feel that like we're supposed to be proud of ourselves, that it's this external evaluation, even though we know that we don't really buy into it. I think it's because it's systematized and we've been trained that way. And so I think for me, one of the things that really resonated with our compass points is around the inventor compass point of learning with others. But I appreciate her point around her students as the people that she learns with. That it's so often when we look at test scores, we talk about teachers working together or schools and administrators and teachers working together. But what she goes back to is kind of what we're talking about with the profile of the graduate of who do you want to be? What do you want to do? How can we help you through that process? And that becomes grounding for her, that it's going back to learning with others and her students that helps to center her. It becomes the purpose and the vision that she reattaches to. So for me, my curiosity is around what structures do we enforce that we can let go of so we can take a step forward in this as teachers, as educators, as administrators. How can we, where we have control, let go of some things so we can keep coming back to those students at the center of our work and the learners at the center of our work.
And I know that we want to wrap up, but I think your question, Rachel, is one that I keep coming back to, which is that as people in education, there are a lot of structures, grades, evaluation, the standardized tests that are all easy to measure, or they're built and driven by numbers, and they're easy to point to. And I would continue to say that the design work that we probably all want to be engaging in is around what does success, or what does joy, or what does it feel like to have a classroom, a school, a district, or a community that is aligned to being human. Because at the end of the day, like that standardized test is one snapshot in time, so much impacts it. Imagine if we flip that paradigm and truly minimize that impact and refocus on other things. Will we feel better about the profession? Will we feel better about what happens in our classrooms and in our schools? I have to believe that that's the possibility of designing in that way.
All right. So let's summarize what our insights are and what the questions that we can leave you with this week. First, when we feel hopeless, defeated, or demoralized, how are we seeking out connection and story? Second, how can we design new narratives and stories that can replace what standardized tests are supposed to tell others about learning? And finally, what structures do we enforce that we can let go of to take a step towards this? Where do we have control that we can share with learners? Thanks for learning alongside us with this episode of the Human School's Curation Corner. Visit thehuman.school and its Learning in Public Hub for additional resources, and join the conversation in our Facebook community, committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.